I have a question or remark for each one of you. So, concerning the last talk, when there was the three strike passed in France, the trade union of the musicians was against it. So one has to make the distinction between music and the development of music, which depends really on the musicians, and the big companies. And another, and concerning the other thing, it seems that they did that there is some type of crisis in the music industry, but the music industry is not the only one who benefits from music. For example, Google gets a huge amount of money from advertisement because there is music going on there. So and then you can regulate the share or rules of how to share profits. For example, in Europe or in France, Google doesn't pay taxes on their benefits, so it's not a fair competition. So in general, there is all this regulation is what is called the net neutrality. So I wonder what is Canada's approach to net neutrality.
It's less robust than say the United States, which actually has a more vigorous regime. It's certainly part of it is a developing principle in Canada, and it militates against actually a lot of the nationalist initiatives they might undertake with regard to the content of the net. And so they are. One of the reasons to rule against zero rating contracts or bundling of services might be. It might be based on a net neutrality principle in Canada. So it is, again, it's less explicit. We've had a much more complacent regulator dealing with an extremely concentrated industry, and have always been much more concerned with stability than competition. It's something they're beginning to change in terms of the regulator's culture. But again, net neutrality might limit their options in terms of, again, imposing content regulations. All that net neutrality would do is ensure that the commercial arrangements are not dominated by or are anti-competitive on the part of the companies that control most internet access in Canada.
Thanks for the presentation. Jim, I heard you like a few years ago, I think 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And
Barcelona.
I had the impression that the things that changed like the last 2 or 3 years, that in 2010 we heard a lot of major companies complaining about the internet and peer-to-peer, etc. And now I feel like the major companies don't complain anymore, but the artists are complaining more than the major companies. So it seems like with streaming services, they have found like a new way to find contracts and money, but the artists did.
I agree, and we talk to artists as well in terms of specifically in terms of streaming, and I'll talk about other things as well. But in terms of streaming, the labels love it because they say, "Oh, once upon a time, you would have bought a CD and you would have paid $20 for your CD or €20 for your CD, and maybe if you're old enough you'd have bought it as vinyl, and then you might have bought it as cassette, and 10 years later you buy it as a CD." Whereas now, paying for access, for subscribing to access on an ongoing basis, they see the longer term benefits of that for them as being very, very significant. In terms of the artist, this model is detrimental. It means very, very few artists. I mean, wealth is highly polarized and power is highly concentrated. Everything that technology promised, it would dismantle. In terms of the artist, the model I showed you, if you sign a multi-rights deal, you as an artist only start to earn anything once the label has recouped its investment across all spheres. So the different sectors are cross-collateralized against each other. So once upon a time, yes, maybe you signed to the publishing arm of a record label as an artist, but once you started making a profit from publishing, then you were making some money. Whereas now, if you're still making recording losses, they use your publishing profits to recoup their recording losses. And if that also has to cover merchandising, it also has to cover 3 or 4 or 5 other different areas, well then it's good for the label, but it means it takes an awful lot longer for the artist to actually earn anything. And earlier, Art in his really interesting talk just before lunch talked about, 77% of streaming services or streaming like music and streaming accounted for by 1% of artists. And that just struck a chord with me, because I read a report and myself and Aaron were talking about this. We couldn't remember whether it related purely to streaming revenues, or I contended it related to broader record industry revenues. But a report came out in 2014 in the United States that showed how 77% of the income was accounted for by 1% of artists, which meant that there was 23% left for everybody else. And if you're one of the guys on the, below sea level on that iceberg in the record industry or publishing, whatever per se, not just in streaming, well then good luck. Yes, in theory, the technology is there in order to, as Negroponte promised, produce your own music, distribute your own music, market your own music, dismantle, bypass that big corporate machinery that, traditionally has mediated relationships between artists and end users. But reality is a different thing. I mean, the independent artists and managers we've talked to have, in many ways, a lot of the new technologies, a lot of social media and the new kind of online or mobile platforms, they're used to bring their artists to the attention of a major distributor, just as much as to an audience like you and me. When it comes to, what's important, if getting synchronized is now important in terms of generating revenue, how do you get synchronized? Well, you try and get licensed to Sony or Universal or Warner. And we've done case studies on artists in Ireland, people like Lisa Hannigan, and before that Damien Rice, which is a few years back now, but it was interesting. A guy who made an independent album, sold about 90,000 copies of it over a period of 2 years, touring in a Volkswagen car the length and breadth of Ireland and the UK, signed to a management company in London called Mondo Management, who had David Gray already on their books, so they used the David Gray model for Damien Rice. Within a year of signing to Warner's, who Mondo had a relationship with. He's on Grey's Anatomy, he's got 2 songs on major Hollywood releases. David Arnold has been brought in to remix the album. He sold 2 million records and he's playing in front of 15,000 people in Dublin and whatnot. And the same process is now, they're trying to do the same thing for Lisa Hannigan with slightly less commercial success. But sorry, a very long-winded answer to agree with you, yes. While this is good for the labels, for the major labels, it doesn't necessarily, there's very little to indicate it's a whole lot better economically for artists.
Thank you very much to both of you. We have to move forward.